Hello, and welcome to Fierce Conversations with Toby, the show where we talk about the hard things. I'm Toby Dorr. In today's episode, Living Louder, we will be discussing how we all have the power to envision a new life. Our guest today is Portia Louder, who shares her story of triumph against the odds. Her memoir is called Living Louder, which is an excellent book. I just finished it. And she is an advocate for incarcerated women. Portia is working on her second book, Born to be Brave. After meeting Portia, you won't look at your world in the same way. Hi, Portia. I'm so excited to have you here with us. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Toby. I am excited to be here. Yay.
We have such similar stories. I think we connect on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
I like to ask a question at the beginning, the same of every guest, that kind of gets us to know a little bit more about you. And that question is pretty simple. What's your favorite color? And what does that color tell us about you?
That's a great question. Excuse me. My favorite color is blue. And the way I describe blue is soft, kind, and strong. And I love my husband's eyes are blue. And we've been married for 25 years. And my favorite color has evolved over time, but while I was in prison, blue was my color because I just remembered. And
I think I do remember reading that
Yeah.
in your book. Before I even asked, when you started saying that, I remembered, oh yeah, her husband's eyes. That's her favorite color.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I love that you said it's kind and soft, and
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about a crossroads in your life that pushed you in a different direction?
Oh, goodness. Just one?
Well, I know there's many. So you can tell us about as many as you'd like, actually.
I look at my life as two major crossroads. And there's more, but the main two, in my 20s, I was a single mother and was struggling with addiction. And so at that point, I hit a bottom and really reached out for support, and my life changed. And so that was a major crossroads for me. I walked away from the things that were causing me harm and my family harm and started to live a more principle-centered life. And that was a big transition for me. I built a company at that point. I married my husband, and it was a big change. It was the hardest thing I had done up to that point in my life, was to make those changes. So that was a crossroads for me. And, years later, I would draw on that when I went to prison because, and it took some time in prison for me to realize that the way out was within my power, that I could decide to do the work and see myself in a different way and empower myself through honesty and accountability. And so that, I would say, obviously prison was a crossroads, but even more so when I decided in prison to change my life and to take ownership of where I was. I feel like that was a big crossroads for me. And, my life has never been the same, but it was devastating and painful, of course, but it was so empowering, and it's given me the life I have today. So.
I think some of the most empowering things in our lives are devastating and painful, because if we never changed and just stayed the same, we just have the same life. But I think change requires pain.
Right.
So I can relate. And I read in your book, one thing really stuck out to me, that you said you realized that you were keeping yourself busy so you didn't have to face your pain.
Right.
And I can so relate to that. And I think that was the biggest indicator to me that I needed to make a change. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you did when you realized you needed to do something different?
Right. Yeah. So before, climbing out of being a single mom and addiction, I spent 5 years just working to build myself, to build my company, to be a mom. And I was working 18 hours a day. I was just working because hard work is, but I lost myself in that. And, for different reasons, prison's painful for different reasons. For me, it was easier than my life out here because I was so busy. And when I got to prison, but it was so painful because I had been using being busy to avoid the feelings that I had, to really take a look at my life and develop that self-awareness. And so, I got there and I had the time, but I was in just total pain because I had been avoiding it for so long. And, even in prison, you can find a way to stay busy. They call it institutionalized, where you get up, you do the same thing every day so you don't have to feel your feelings. And I found myself even doing that in prison. I started working as a photographer. I was working in education. I was getting up at 4 a.m. and I created this routine to keep myself so busy. And then I got to that place where I realized, and I got some good advice too, but I realized, like, if things are going to be different for me, man, I need to do the work while I'm here. And I feel like that's a huge accomplishment, to be willing to walk through your pain,
I can so relate to that. Before I went to prison, I had a checklist, and at the end of the day, if I could check 17 things off my list, I felt like it'd been a good day.
Right.
17. So ridiculous, And I remember sitting in prison going, wow, no deadlines, no projects, no emails. I have time.
Right.
And so, I can relate to that because I decided too to use that time to, reflect and make a difference, at go in a different direction in my life.
Right.
So, time can be a gift. It is difficult. Time in prison is difficult, and the clock feels like it never moves.
Right.
But there is a way you can use that time to your advantage, and I love that. One of the other lines. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting because, a lot of people in prison feel like, I'm just going to sleep my time away or waste my time, And there I was with the reality of how valuable time is, really hit me sitting in prison. I decided, like, I am never going to sell my time for money like I did before. I'm going to enjoy it. And now I'm really, like, I value my time so much. So I was grateful for that shift, versus a lot of people look at it as wasted time. For me, it was so valuable that I didn't want to, when I got out, I didn't want to keep myself busy anymore, because I felt like that internal work, once you get going on that, it's like, it's everything.
It's just vital to who we are, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I found that a lot of that internal work is what gave me the courage to tell my story and write my book. And I think you've done the same thing with your book. So, one of the other lines that really stuck out to me, and I think this is so true, is that sometimes we're keeping secrets, but those secrets are actually keeping us.
Yeah.
So can you expand on that a little bit and tell us, the cost of having secrets?
Oh, yeah. I was so worried about what people thought of me before I went to prison, always trying to, last thing you want to do is admit your mistakes, right? Now I see how powerful it is to openly admit your mistakes, because you really do let go of all your fears of what people think and start to get down. That stuff doesn't have power over you anymore. Like, as long as you're keeping those secrets, it all has power over you. And so I think I shared in the book where I was in a class and this woman gets up and she openly admits all of her mistakes. This is in prison. And she had suffered a lot. She had made a lot of really bad choices. But to see somebody take complete ownership of those choices and to acknowledge all of those things, there was just this power in the room. And that's when I decided, I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to make a spreadsheet. I'm going to identify all the things that I did, because it's also that self-awareness and objectivity to be able to take a look at it without judgment. And like, it really allowed me to have compassion for myself, to reach out and allow people to tell me how I hurt them. And that's empowering. And when you don't care what people think, isn't that so empowering? I mean, instead, I don't feel like, I guess going to prison is kind of a, it's kind of a death to your former self. At least it was for me. And I got to the point where there was a group of us in prison that were really so determined to do the work. And so they would wake me up at night and say, hey, Miss Louder or Portia, can I tell you another thing that happened that I forgot? Like, we wanted to just share it with each other and get it out, because it's like purging and cleansing to just say it and then move on. And so that was the opposite, where you want to convince everyone you're okay. No, openly admit your mistakes. That's freedom.
Yes, I so agree with you, because if you can't admit your mistakes, then you can't move past them. And I know in my case, my judge, my attorney, my family, my friends, even the warden at the jail tried to get me to say I was a victim and that I was manipulated into uh, my act. And I knew that if I took that way out, I'd be trapped forever as a victim.
Right.
And so it was really important to me to stand up and say, no, I made a choice and this was my choice. And it was not a good choice,
Yep.
but nevertheless, it was my choice. And I felt empowered by doing that. So I can really relate to that.
I
I
love
think
that.
that's beautiful.
I love that
Yeah.
because that's true power is when you own where you are, because then you can choose something different, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly. And, I had this next line I wanted to share that from your book was almost exactly the line that was in my book. So I truly related to it. And that was, you will get through this and someday you'll help others. And I had that line. I believe God spoke it to me when I was on suicide watch about 2 years into my prison stay. And I thought, here I am, I'm almost at the end and I'm getting through this, but I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And, I heard that voice tell me that. And then I read that very same line in your book, and you are actually out there doing exactly what you promised, like I'm doing as well. And I think that's pretty powerful. So, could you tell our reader or listeners some of the things you're doing today to help incarcerated women? Because I think it's such a beautiful story.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I get to go in and speak with women that are incarcerated, and I work with women in a treatment center. But I also do, which is so cool because there you are at your lowest moment in prison and feeling like here. I mean, you can't see how beautiful it's going to get walking through that pain, And I think in my book, I had this. She was a woman that was a little older than me that was one of my coworkers, and she said, Portia, I can see you suffering, but you have this important purpose on this earth. And I think that's what we do for each other. And so yesterday I was speaking at a boys detention center, and I thanked the boys for coming in, and they just seemed like they weren't happy to be there. I said, hey boys, thanks for coming. Of course you had to be here. So I said, but thanks for listening. If you choose to, then you guys will benefit today. It's your choice. You get to decide. You have to be here, but you get to decide whether you listen. And so as I shared my story, I told them, I said, each one of you has this unique purpose on this earth. Each one of you has this story that can be your strength, that can be a triumph or a tragedy. You get to decide. And one of the boys said, I want to tell my story someday. I want to help people. I said, I love that because I think what you've been through needs to be shared. And then another boy looks at me and he said, I'm dead already. How am I going to tell my story? And I said, friend, you have to decide to live. You have to be willing to face this, your pain, so that you can give someone else hope. But I mean, I feel like it's so important for us when we're walking through that hard stuff to come to know who we are and to be able to recognize that strength in us, that purpose that we have on this earth, and to believe that the world is cheering us on. I think that's important. It won't help us not to believe that. Regardless of what people think, I got to the place where I just thought everybody wants me to succeed. The world is cheering me on. I have an important purpose. And I feel like it was somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I got out and immediately people started asking me to serve in ways that have been so meaningful. And so, yeah, I work with people that are incarcerated. I write content for prisons and, the same thing you do. And it's beautiful. And it isn't about making money. It's about something so much bigger than that,
That's right. It's about changing the world.
Right.
And, I love what you said in that story, because I do think all of us have a story to tell and the world needs to hear each one of our stories. And you may have 100 people who tell a story about coming out of addiction, but they're all going to tell it in a slightly different way. And this story is going to reach this person, and that story about the same thing is going to reach a different person. So we need all those flavors of all those stories in order to go out and make a difference in the world. So I think that's really beautiful and prophetic.
Thank you.
I there was another part in your book that at the very beginning of your book, you wrote, sometimes denial is a safe place to keep your heart. And then later, almost at the end of the book, you said, yet denial is unhealthy. So, how did you make that transition from feeling safe in denial to feeling like that wasn't where you wanted to stay?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no growth in denial at all. Denial's terrifying for me because I spent so much time leading up to going to prison that I had 10 years that I was fighting this and not taking ownership. So all that wasted time. But when I first got there, if you look at the stages of grief, I mean, denial's early on, right? Like you go through that, but there's no growth there. It's just like a safe landing. Even with PTSD, when you want to move through it and start, get past the trauma, there's the denial phase, but a lot of people get stuck there. And I watched that. You probably did too in prison. There were people that were very smart. I had a woman she had her doctorate degree in political science, and she would just sit there in front of the TV and she would not acknowledge why it wasn't her fault. It was the government's fault. And then she could feel like everyone else is a mess and but I watched her for a while and I was like, oh man. And I started noticing that people are stuck. And I thought, if I choose not to acknowledge what I've done, which is really painful to acknowledge, I'm not going to grow. And I wanted to grow, So I was willing to walk through it, but it's hard.
That is so true. Yeah. I do think prison is a great opportunity for growth because you certainly can't get any lower than you already are. So you can either just stay there on the bottom or you can move forward.
Right.
So,
but how many don't grow? How many don't grow?
Oh, so many of them.
Yeah.
And if we could put programs into all those prisons that show women and men how to move through that denial and own their story and move forward with it, the world would be a better place. Because most people are going to be released from prison.
Right.
And I believe we should release healthy people instead of people who are more broken than them when they went in. So I think, it's awesome that you're putting together programs to help get them there. I think that's beautiful.
I had a conversation. So my book is available in prisons right now. And I had on tablets. And I had this guy reach out to me he sent me an email request because in the back of my book, there's a place, I have that takes emails. And so, his email said, thank you so much. This gave me hope. I'm excited. And, I'm in the shoe. I got in a fight or whatever, but I'm trying to change my life. So my response back to him was, I'm so proud of you for owning where you are. I'm cheering you on. I believe in you. I'm glad that you enjoyed the book. And then he sent me back an email that said, how can you think that I'm going to be successful when and he just listed everything but nobody's trying to help me. Nobody's this, nobody. And by the time I got done reading it, I was like heavy. I was exhausted, and I thought, friend, somewhere you got to find your power. You got to say, I'm here because I chose it. And it was, I don't know how to get people there other than to model it. You model it, you give content that allows them to, but there's still a choice. They have to choose. We all do when we're ready to say, I'm not going to try to hustle this person to get a few bucks. I'm going to take ownership of my life instead of that quick fix of, in prison, it's like, send me $5 so I can get a bag of Doritos versus be my friend and tell me truth,
Yes. Tell me how to get through this.
Right.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And I just want to kind of clarify, a shoe is also maybe sometimes called being in the hole, but it's a special housing unit where it's their punishment inside prison. And they put you in a very small cell all alone with no interaction with anybody or anything. And it's
difficult.
Jail inside a jail. It's really difficult. Yeah. It's a terrible place to be. And, I watched a documentary a little while back about, some prisons keep people in the shoe for years at a time.
Right.
And I watched this documentary about a prison in Colorado that eliminated the shoe altogether and how different it's made the whole prison environment. So, that it was pretty eye-opening, I think.
Yeah.
Another thing that you said in your book is when you got out of prison, you were kind of evaluating your life, and you said, I had nothing, yet I had everything.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
It was such a shift for me to be in prison and realize that, I mean, when I was in prison, I didn't miss vacations, I didn't miss money, I didn't miss comforts. I missed the time with my family. I didn't,
Mhm.
my whole perspective shifted, and I could see that I'm going to leave this earth with nothing, but my soul and who I become while I'm here is what I'll take with me. And that's how it was in
Mhm.
prison. Like, I'm not gonna. I mean, there's what I could maybe run a store or run a hustle while I'm in prison and make a few $100s or something. I mean, it's of no significance. Or I can use my time to educate myself and to connect with others and to serve. And my heart was so full with all of these experiences when I left that I felt like the wealthiest person on the planet. I mean, I just felt full.
Mhm.
Like, oh my gosh, I have met people from all walks of life and seen a completely different view, so everything
Mhm.
important is inside of me. These experiences are so valuable, which with you as well. It's why we wrote a book. It's why we
Mhm.
share, because
Mhm.
it gave us that whole different view. But I mean, well, now, and I live the same way. I live really simple out here. I don't care about
Mhm.
material things and accomplishments. I just try to connect because I that was fulfilling to my soul when I was
Mhm.
in there. So
Yeah, that is so important. And I remember when I got out of prison, I went and lived with my mom, and she said, Toby, I just have the most fun every day just watching you. You open a door and walk outside and act like it's the best gift in the world. And she said, you've made me change the way I look at
yeah,
things. Well, walking through a door is so powerful
right,
when you have never been able to open a door
yeah,
for years.
right,
They've had to been opened for you
right,
and when they wanted them open, not when you wanted them open.
right,
So I think it's just beautiful to be able to take and appreciate the things that we do have that most people dismiss as
yeah,
taken for granted or not important.
right. Yeah,
So I think that is beautiful.
I don't know about you, but all I wanted to do was eat vegetables when I got out, you know?
Yeah, at fruit. I wanted fruit. We never had any fruit,
Oh,
and it was like, "Oh my gosh, give me an apple, give me an orange, give me a banana." It was just like heaven,
yeah,
and the silly things that people don't realize
yeah,
how much they mean to you.
right.
Yeah,
What a
it's
what a
just
gift.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's such a blessing
It is.
to have that
Mhm.
reset and to appreciate things in a different way.
That's so true. That's so true. And another sentence that you had in your book that I thought was so powerful. I let go of who I was supposed to be and embraced who I really was.
Mm. I love that. I love that because
Mhm.
again, before I went to prison, I was so worried about, all these expectations. Well, I'm supposed to be this, and I'm a mom, and I'm supposed to be a
Mhm.
business owner, and then I
Mhm.
just realized, like, again, everything important is inside of me. Who I am
Mhm.
is exactly who I'm supposed to be. Now, how do you figure that out in prison? Out here you have all the money and the clothes and the things and the titles, and they take all that away, and you figure out who you really are. And I'm thinking,
Mhm.
man, I can't imagine. I never knew. Like, I had this kid ask me yesterday. He's like, "Are you glad you went to prison?" I said, "So grateful, so grateful."
Mhm.
I don't know how other
Mhm.
people figure out who they are without going, but that's what it took for me, you know?
I so agree. I tell people all the time, I had to go to prison to be free.
Right?
It's the only place where I had the ability to be free
Yeah.
and be myself.
Yep.
And it is just powerful. I don't wanna repeat it, and I'm
Right.
sure you don't either, but, I am grateful that it was in my life. I think it gave me experiences that most people don't have,
Right.
and I look at it as a gift.
Yep. Me too. Yeah.
I think it's so important. You also said in your book that self-forgiveness is a journey, not a destination,
Yeah.
and I think women especially are so hard on themselves. And I just recently taught a 2-day seminar in Kansas City called Slaying Your Shame Dragon.
Mhm.
And it was so powerful and it connected with so many women. And I do think that, we need to keep in mind that just because we've accomplished something doesn't mean we can't quit working on it
Right.
because it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. You know, the self-forgiveness process for me, a big piece of that has been to be honest and open about my mistakes, because like we
Mm-hmm.
talked about, then I don't feel, I feel very free because I've openly admitted them. But it also, in being willing to let other people tell me how I hurt them, especially my children, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
what I do is I tell them, you know, please tell me when you're hurting, or you
Mm-hmm.
know, it used to be, you know, if my daughter would say, "Hey, mom, this really hurt," I was too hurt inside to be able to accept that. But I feel, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why I think it is a journey, is that we forgive ourselves and then we allow other people to feel their pain as well, which is so validating for them. I mean, isn't it what we want? We want the people that love us to also grow and be healthy. And if we can open ourselves
Yes.
up and say, "Hey, I'm sorry I hurt you. Share with me your pain." And that, you know, that's
Mm-hmm.
the beauty of being willing to forgive yourself. It's like, I know I hurt you, but I'm okay with that because it's your journey to now heal too, you know? And
Absolutely. I think that is beautiful. It's not our responsibility to heal everyone from the pain that we've caused.
right,
We can be there with them as they walk through it, but it is their journey too.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I feel like, you know, my parents did the best they could. They made some mistakes.
Hmm.
I did the best I could at the time and made some mistakes, but it's my responsibility to deal with the pain that I have, and it's theirs. But the best thing I think
Hmm.
we can do is just acknowledge that they have it and allow them to do it. We're not here to fix it for them. They'll figure it out. That's the journey, you
Right.
know?
That's right.
Yeah.
We're stealing their lesson if
Right.
we try to do it for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's just beautiful. And I know I saw on social media once that you posted you'd just come from the women's prison somewhere doing something, and someone asked you where you'd been, and you said, I was at the women's prison, and they said, "Were you scared?" And you said, "No, those are my people." And I love that because I don't think that people understand, especially in the women's prison. I spent a lot of time in the men's prison as a volunteer, and I'll tell you, it's totally different.
I've heard
But
that.
in the women's prison, there is a sisterhood.
Hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more
Oh,
about
yeah.
how you experienced that?
It's crazy to me when I see stuff and the way they portray things on TV. Because what I
Mhm.
experienced was this kindness and this tenderness and this. I mean, all we have is each other, you know, and we're going through this
Mhm.
stuff together. I remember when I got to Victorville, there was a gal that was really sick, and her roommate she was a heavier black lady, and she read, and you know, didn't leave the unit that often, probably health
Mhm.
problems or whatever else, but her bunkie was really sick. And I looked out the unit one morning, and after they opened the door, and I saw her walking around with her bunkie with her arm around her. And I walked out and I watched her, and she's like, "You're going to be okay, honey. We just got to get you out and get you some fresh air. You're going to be okay." And I'm like, I probably would have saw this woman on the street and thought, maybe been a little intimidated because she was tall and, you know, a little bit
Mhm.
imposing. But here she is showing the most kindness to her bunkie who's sick.
Mhm.
She didn't want to be out there. She's
Yes.
out there first thing in the morning helping her walk around. You know, that's the kind of
Mhm.
stuff. I mean, just so much kindness and tenderness. And I've encountered that multiple times. I had a guy, actually the taxi driver that picked me up and took me to the camp in Victorville. And I said, "Can you take me to the prison?" He's like, "Why are you going to the prison?" He's all scared. You know, I said,
Mhm.
"Because I'm going to be living there. That's my new
Yes.
home."
I can so relate. When I got out of prison, I
Oh,
was in Houston, Texas, and I took a Greyhound bus back to Kansas City. And then I had to get a taxi cab to take me to the halfway house.
yeah.
And I got in the cab, and the driver said, "This little bitty black guy, all curled up, and he said, 'Where are you going?' And I said, 'Oh, to this place in Leavenworth. I don't know the address, but I know how to get there.' And he said, 'Well, tell me what it is. I probably know where it is.' And I said, 'Well, it's the halfway house.' And he said, 'Oh, you work there?' And I said, 'No, I'm going there to live.' I said, 'I just got off of the bus. I just got out of federal prison in Houston, Texas.' And he laughed. And I said, 'But I'm not going to rob you or anything. I'm not dangerous.' And he said, 'Honey, I know all kinds of people that have been in prison.
Yeah.
I'm not the least bit scared. And I thought that was just so funny because the first person I ever had to tell that I just came from prison, and it was this little taxi cab driver that thought it was the most funny thing he'd ever heard. So I can so relate.
Right. It's just it's where
Yeah.
we live, and gosh, but when I left, Waseca, the Minnesota prison, my heart was so full. I felt like I felt sentimental. All these places, like
Mhm.
I had eaten in the chow hall over and over and over. I had walked that track.
Mhm.
And, the education department that I worked in, I just walked around and I felt like it was like leaving college or something. I mean, I had grown so
Mhm.
much there that in my mind, I'm like, this is sacred space for me. Like, this is where I figured
Mhm.
out who I am. I did not feel at all nothing but love for those women in that
Yeah.
location.
Have you been back to any of the prisons that you actually served time in?
No, but I'm going to. I'm going to go to all of
Yeah.
them. That's on my bucket
Yeah.
list.
I'm interested to see how it feels when you go back into the same place
Right.
because, it's a totally different
Yeah.
viewpoint.
Right.
So, yeah, I know I've never felt such strong friendships as I had it with those women in prison.
Right.
And the hard thing is when you get out of prison and you're on paper, which is on probation or parole,
Mm.
and you're not allowed to communicate with people that are in prison. And it's like, I used to think, how can I get through this when the women who know me and know what I'm going through, I can't talk to them?
Right.
That it just seemed like such a ridiculous requirement.
Right. I had the same challenge and I have broken that rule.
Mhm. I did too. I did
And I
too.
told my
You know?
probation officer, I'm like, you can't ask me. I mean, I was writing letters to my good friend. I just felt,
Mhm.
it's just, I struggled when I got out here because I didn't feel that same
Mhm.
connection because you live right next to people, you know what's going on. Now I've
Mhm.
gotten better now and I'm more open to connecting with everyone, but at first, just like when you leave the military and you have this bond and this camaraderie and you're supposed to go home and pretend it never happened, that was the other thing.
Mhm.
I was like, wait a minute, people come home from like I'm LDS and so people come home from missions and everyone celebrates. I'm like, I come home from prison and we're not supposed to talk about it. Forget that. I'm talking about
Yes.
it.
Yes. I always thought nobody in my family ever asked me what was it like in there. And
Yeah.
it's like I want to scream about it. I
Yeah.
want to tell the world what
Right.
I went through.
Right.
I want to tell them about these wonderful women I met.
Yep.
And it's almost like, oh, don't talk about that.
No
You
way.
know?
I'm not willing to
Yeah.
do that. I
You
feel like,
can't do it.
uh-uh.
No,
And I don't think it's
I
healthy
agree.
for anyone. In fact, one of my
No.
visions is that we celebrate the strength. How can we expect people to go to prison and change if they can't come out and talk about these great changes that they've experienced? We need to celebrate that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I felt like when I got out of prison, I was like, I was so proud of myself because I had survived it all
Right.
and I was still here and
Yeah. Yeah.
I was me finally. I was me. After 48 years, I was who I was supposed to be.
Right. And
And
that
it
needs
took
to be
going to prison to
celebrated.
find that.
Yes.
That's exactly right. I so agree. Maybe that's what we should do is let's just have celebration parties every year for people getting out. I just think it'd be
I
awesome.
agree.
Well, Portia, it has been awesome talking to you today. And I'm just curious, is there one question that you wish I'd asked you? And if so, how would you have answered it?
Hmm. I don't think that there's a question, but there's something I would want to say. And
Okay.
I think I would just say, don't ever give up. Don't ever, ever,
Mm,
ever give up. I could not see a life this beautiful when I was dealing with the legal process, or even when I was a young single mother. And walking through that has given me a completely different view. And so, whatever
mhm.
hard you may be going through, it holds the seeds to the beautiful future, to the best version of yourself. And I think your future self is truly cheering you on because I know that I'm cheering my old self on. Like, thank you for doing
Mhm.
it. Thank you for doing it. And it's open to all of us. And I just don't give up. I offend myself when I look back at my former self, the way I saw the world. I'm like, why did I see it that way? But yet here I
Mhm.
am today, and it's the best part of my life. And I think you are experiencing that too. So
Mhm.
don't give
I
up on
love that.
yourself. Yeah.
I love that so much. And my message that I always share to people is remember, none of us is our worst mistake. We all have so much more to offer than just that one um, action. And most of the time, those so called mistakes are really blessed opportunities to learn and grow. Next week, we'll continue to bring you inspiring stories by people who've identified a need for change and are working to make a difference in the world. Subscribe to our Patreon channel, Fierce Conversations, for special access and behind-the-scenes information. Go to patreon.com/Fierce Conversations or click on the link in the show notes. You'll also find links there to purchase my book, Living with Conviction, and there'll be a link to purchase Portia's book, Living Louder, and also a link to Portia's website as well. In my memoir, Living with Conviction, I recount a conversation I had in prison where my friend Lisa told me, "In here, we can talk about all the hard things. In fact, I think we must. And so we shall." This is Fierce Conversations with Toby. Until next time.